as a PM, you're working with a team to kind of write out like the PRD, like what is the product requirements? What problem are we trying to solve for the user? As a result of solving that problem, what are some of the, top line metrics that we would be moving and so forth. So
Hey everyone, welcome to our channel. My name is Dante and I'm a product manager. I have a very special guest with us today, Philana Benton. She is a product manager at Google and we're actually teammates at Facebook a few years back. I'm super excited to have her with us today. She has had an impressive background and journey in the tech industry. We'll be talking about what it's like to be product manager at Google and at Facebook, interview tips and advice. So very excited to have Philana join us today. Philana, how are you doing today?
doing great, doing great. Enjoying the weather. It's kind of warm today. Hopefully it'll warm up a little more.
Yeah, living the dream. I'm very excited to be chatting with you today. So, for folks that are meeting you for the first time today, could you please tell us a bit more about yourself?
Yes, of course. So, as you mentioned, I am a product manager at Google. I've had a very, I'd say, colorful background. Up until Google, I actually started off as a software engineer at Microsoft. So, I was there for about a few years before teaching in nonprofit for about a year, and then decided, hey, I would like to know more about the business side. So, I got my MBA from Kellogg, Northwestern. And from there, I ended up at Facebook, where I was there for a few years and finally ended up at Google. So that's a little bit about me. I will say I have jumped around a lot, but I think for me personally, I really like to optimize for experiences. So if you look at my LinkedIn profile, you'll see that in undergrad, I've interned with the CIA, a gaming company startup, Zynga. I was interned at Xerox. I was at Amazon. So yeah, very colorful background, I'd say.
Yeah, you've had a lot of great experiences. And I'm curious, what does a typical day look like for a product manager at Google?
Yeah, of course. So I'd say it hasn't really changed much at the other places where I was a product manager, but specifically at Google. I mean, and also other places. I think the typical day is I wake up, of course, check my mail, make sure that I can respond to any outstanding emails. I think next is I look at the metrics, my dashboards to see like how are the metrics looking for my product area. And then from there, it's making sure I send out updates to my teams. So currently, I work with 4 to 5 teams, I'd say, meeting up with my various teams to see how their features or their product areas are doing. Also meeting with partner teams who may be working on in the same space but a different product. Updating all of my PRDs to make sure that they're up to date with any of the information that I've retrieved thus far. And also meeting with my other partners, so like design team, my researcher who I love so much, and so forth. So I'd say that's pretty much most of my day. It's just like checking on metrics, making sure that I'm communicating any updates and refining any of the strategy or roadmaps, and making sure that that information is provided to all of my stakeholders.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like a very packed day that you have. And I heard the word meetings thrown out a lot. That's something that I also experience on my day to day as a product manager. And I'm just curious, how do you go about managing your time and planning that throughout the week as a product manager?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, well, as a product manager and or when you go into product management, you do have your team and you have your manager and your skip level manager and strategy that kind of provides which direction you should go. So, managing your time will be a lot around how do I make sure that the opportunities that I have to spend time is in line with the strategy of my team and or the company. And so you'll have a lot of opportunities to spend your time. And so you have to sit back and strategize and say, okay, which one is in line with our strategy to make sure that we are supporting or solving the problems of our users? And what are some of the things that may not be as directly in line? And what should I do with that? Should I try to postpone it for later on in the year? Should I be honest with the people who are providing these opportunities and saying it's not in line with our strategy? But it's definitely something that I have had to done as a product manager at both, Facebook or Meta, formerly known as Facebook, and Google, is how to manage my time and making sure that the time that I am giving is in line with the strategy of my team and the company.
No, that's super helpful. In a way, you're kind of PMing your own day to day, right? Like you got to make trade offs. You got to prioritize which meetings you need to attend versus ones you can skip. So in a way, you're treating your calendar like a roadmap and saying, "Hey, this is a must-have meeting I need to attend," versus something that's nice to have that I can postpone for later on. Spoken like a true PM. So I thank you for sharing that advice on time management. You mentioned you've worked at both Facebook and at Google. I'm curious to hear more about what are the similarities and the differences in being a product manager at Google versus Facebook.
That's a good question. Okay, so to be fair, I would like to point out before I respond. So when I was at Facebook, I was working on Facebook Lite, which is the focus on like our international audience. And so currently at Google, I'm working on Google Search. So everyone uses that. It's a much larger product, or as far as like audience goes than Facebook Lite. It was a smaller audience. It was also specifically more towards the international user base. So with that, I will be honest and say I think the biggest difference is the result of the different types of audiences. But I will say, just in general, as you work on products that have products that are older that have been around for a while, and also products that affect a higher user base, there tends to be a lot more of a process around running experiments or trying to launch something. So I know for me, when I was at Facebook, I was able to, ideate with my designer and my engineers and my researcher around like, what do we feel what are some big problems that we need to solve for our users, and being able to create a MVP, do a little test out there. And like, if we had good metrics, over 3 or 4 weeks, and we were able to launch it, especially if you're working on a product that's web, you can launch things a lot more faster, because you don't have to go through the whole process of getting if you're working on a product that's related to mobile, you have to make sure that the app is approved by the Play Store or the App Store. So working on web, there's a lot more easier iterations that you can do. So Facebook, hands down, when I was working with Facebook Lite, I would say like the releases were very fast, like within 3 or 4 weeks. At Google now, it's a lot more longer than a few weeks. I'd probably say to launch a feature, probably maybe 2 or 3 months. There's a lot more work involved, right? Engineers are working to edit, code or legacy code that's been there for a while. So it's a lot more intricate. It's a lot more finicky, I'd say. So you have to be very careful when you're adding or editing legacy code, because that can affect a lot of different other products. And also just making sure that, whatever changes you do make, it does affect, especially for me, billions of people. And so making sure that we're going through the privacy and the legal process to make sure that we are being very careful with what we're launching, making sure that it's something that delights the users, but also, making sure that it's safe, right? And that whatever you launch, if it touches other products, making sure that the user is safe using those kind of products as well. So I will say that's probably one of the biggest is time to launch.
No, yeah, that's great. I think one thing that I've been learning a lot about is mobile deployments. And yes, you have to submit to the App Store. It needs to get approved. It might get rejected, and you have to kind
Right.
of go back to the drawing board and address all the bugs or issues or changes that are required. Wait for the next version, add the changes in, ensure you test them, and then wait to see if you are approved by the Play Store and the App Store. Yeah, I would like to dive a little bit deeper on deployments. And you mentioned that on web is a lot easier to experiment to make changes. Can you help us, from a product manager standpoint, walk us through how web deployments work?
Okay, yeah. I guess we'll first start with from the idea. So you have an idea, your designer has an idea, your engineer has an idea, your researcher has an idea, your PMM may have an idea. You give it to the team. The team generally is like really excited about it, or if they're like, oh, that sounds great, but we tried it before and unfortunately it didn't work. So then you're back to the drawing board. But let's say someone has an idea, it's really good. The team's like, yes, let's continue on. So from there, as a PM, you're working with a team to kind of write out like the PRD, like what is the product requirements? What problem are we trying to solve for the user? As a result of solving that problem, what are some of the top line metrics that we would be moving and so forth? So start there. As a PM, you're writing the PRD, you're making sure that all of your stakeholders are involved because they have their own special expertise that they can provide in getting this product out the door. So once you have your PRD set up, reviewed, commented, everyone's in alignment, the first thing you want to do is first you want to run an LE. LE or a live experiment is something that, well, I won't say all companies call it, but you want to run an experiment. So in order to run an experiment, what your engineer will do is generally at least they'll have at least kind of like we call it A/B testing. Sometimes it's like A/B CDE testing, but we'll just say A/B testing for now. So with the experiment, essentially, there's some tool that I feel like either most companies have that decides like who's going to be an experiment and who isn't going to be an experiment. And so the engineer writes code that allows the tool to say like a group of people won't have the feature, and then like a small group of people will, and then it's comparing those two kind of like audiences. So prime example, it's like, let's say one of the metrics we want to move is, clicks. Like if we have a new product, we want people to click on it. So what will happen is in the experiment, you'll see like, okay, well, this many people saw this feature and then they clicked on it. So it'll affect like your click-through rate. So you look at the metrics and say, oh, okay, well, a lot of people clicked it, or not a lot of people clicked it. But let's say a lot of people clicked it. So then from there, we want to think about, okay, so how do we think about actually like deploying this or launching it? And so let's say like we'll do the web, for example. So let's say like the metrics are great. We're going to launch it. It's a web app. It's a feature on the web. And so generally what happens is when you're deploying it, you get green light from different parts of the company. So you might have like production engineers, you might have release engineers, just trying to make sure that if you do launch it to the world, that it doesn't affect any other products that may touch similar code. And so you do something generally called a rollout. So rollout means when you're deploying it to the world, if your experiment is successful, means generally you might roll it out to 5%, make sure, nothing happens or nothing blows up. Because ideally the experiment covers that, but mistakes happen, life happens, you miss things. So you roll it out to 5%, wait around to make sure that it's a pretty smooth rollout, no bugs. Then it might be 10%, then it might be 30%, 50%. And then what I've seen typically, it's like once it gets to 50% and there's not that many issues, then generally they just go ahead and roll out to 100% of the user base that would see the particular web app. So yeah, that's a general just overview of how deployment works. Probably changes. It might be tweaked or changed for some companies, but that's a general overview.
Awesome. That's super helpful. And thank you walking us through that example. And you touched about experimentation, which is something very important as well that many companies do. They may come up in interviews when you're having, product sense or product execution interviews. So these are really good concepts that, folks should be aware of. And I appreciate you kind of giving us a live example on Google search, doing a web deployment, but first starting with an experiment before you decide to roll out a feature. One thing that stood out to me when you mentioned differences between Google and Facebook is it sounds that Facebook or Meta now has a more of an experimentation type of culture. Google, it sounds like it's a little bit harder, but you mentioned you are building products that are impacting the lives of billions of people around the world. So scale is way bigger to an extent for Google search. So it's really interesting to see there's a lot more processes, it sounds, at Google versus Facebook. And Facebook, it was like faster to make changes, as you had pointed out.
Yes, yeah, definitely. I know there are, of course, just some few cases. There are some teams at Facebook where the process tends to be a lot longer too, because of course, like their audience is larger. And then also there are instances and cases at Google where they can be a lot more nimble than Google search. So I think it all, yeah, just like really depends on you as a product manager on, what do you want to prioritize and what motivates you. It could be just like how can I reach as many people as possible, which means your process might be a little longer. Or it could be just like how can we learn new things? How can I learn more about the user needs and problems that they may have that we could potentially solve? So, I think both can go either way. I don't know. I haven't decided which motivates me. I think I might technically be more on the like experiment side and, like kind of nimble, fast testing to see like what can we learn and how can we help users and discover more problems.
Mhm.
I think I think I might that might motivate me a little bit more.
Gotcha, gotcha. And that's very important self-awareness, I think, for folks that are starting to interview or want to switch jobs or roles. Think about what are your motivators, right? Do you want to be in an environment where you like to experiment, try out new features, right? They may work, they may not work, right? But you're constantly learning and iterating. Or do you want to be in a place where you care more about scale? You want to launch something that's going to impact thousands, millions, billions of people in some cases, like Filana is doing, which is amazing. So that's a great kind of advice for folks to think about. And sometimes interviewers do ask you, like, why do you want to work here? And really behind that question is what are your motivators, right?
Yeah.
Why do you want to be in a specific type of company, work for a specific type of product team? They're looking to really understand what motivates you. We've been chatting a lot about motivation. So why did you decide to jump into product management? What motivated you?
Yeah, so I think for me, it was just my myriad of experiences through engineering. I know I was building stuff, I was being asked to build stuff, but I had questions around like, why are we building this? Who are we building this for? Like, who is the user? And so my interest, it grew more from just how do I build this or like to why are we building this? And so in part of in trying to answer that question, I did try to answer it on my by myself. I will say this was like 10 years ago. So there was less content out there than there is now. And I really couldn't find or didn't know like any resources to answer that question. And so that was actually one of the reasons why I did decide to go to grad school and get my MBA. And so after grad school, I had these skill sets in engineering, business, and I also did a dual degree program. So I had a master's in design theory.
Mm,
And so I kind of asked myself, okay, I have these three skill sets. What's out there where I can utilize all three skill sets?
mm.
And so just talking around with some of my classmates and some professors, I discovered the world of product management and I realized that it was a perfect role to kind of integrate all of these skill sets. And so that's what made me decide to pursue product management.
That's great. No, I think a lot of folks describe the role of a product manager as being that triple Venn diagram, right? Where it's like user experience, technical skills, business, right? The strategy, right? And in the middle of it is product management. I'm curious to hear more about MBAs. There's a lot of folks listening in today that are wondering, do I need an MBA to become a product manager? What's your take on that? Do you think that's a hard requirement? It's a nice to have. How did that help you in landing your role?
Yeah, I think it's a nice to have. Definitely not a requirement. I think in general thinking about grad school, asking yourself, why do I want to go to grad school and is it worth kind of the finances that it will require to go to grad school and also the finances lost if you decide to work full time or if you decide to go to school full time, is it worth the loss of salary from, not working full time? And so for me, I think it was really important. So again, like my background is engineering. And so I really did want it to learn more around the business space and also create a community with people from different backgrounds in business. So I, for one, decided to get my MBA because I wanted to increase my network, which there's no monetary value to. Again, it's just having a structured environment where I can learn, especially from experts, being able to actually ask questions, go to office hours, talk to my professors, and learn more from them one on one, and also learn from my peers as well. So that's why I decided to go to grad school. I think it did help me based on what I was trying to achieve. But I think, very honestly, if I mean, you know yourself best. So one, it's like if you already have the network, then you ask yourself, like, does it make sense for me to get my MBA? I mean, now I feel like there's a lot more free resources. So if you're fine without not having that like face to face interaction and conversation with experts, maybe an MBA doesn't make sense. To be fully transparent, I had a majority of my grad school paid for. I can't say I would have attended grad school if I did not have most of it paid for. So that's another question you should ask yourself too is like, do I have the finances to take on, additional loans or to not be working? So those are just like some of the questions to ask yourself. That's why I went to grad school. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's a nice to have,
Mhm.
but of course there's a lot of pros and cons to going to grad school.
Gotcha. No, thank you for touching upon the actual questions one should be asking themselves if they're thinking about pursuing an MBA degree. That's really helpful. And folks, you heard it from Filana, right? It's a nice to have, not a must have, right? There's many routes, many ways to become a product manager. It's a non-linear trajectory to product management. At least that was it for me as well, right? I don't have an MBA, but just through doing lots of different types of roles and eventually merging into what is a role that's diverse, that includes, some technical problem solving, includes some design work, but also the business side strategy, right? And product manager, that's what it is in a nutshell. So Falana, diving deeper now in terms of interviews, right? Lots of our listeners today may have an upcoming interview or are preparing to become product managers one day. Could you tell us a bit more about the interview process at Google versus Facebook?
Yes. So I think hands down, I think the core difference between Facebook and or Meta. Sorry, y'all. Dante and I, we were there when Meta was called Facebook, so we're probably going to just call it Facebook for the rest.
Yes.
And Google is well, I'll tell you the similarities first. So the similarities are they generally, I think, have close to the same amount of interviews, 4 to 5. So that's similar. The other similarities are you will be asked a kind of like metrics or estimation question around like how do you measure the success of a product? Both of them have a product design question as well. And then depending on, I think maybe for Facebook as well, but depending on how far in the industry you are as a product manager, you might be asked also more like product strategy questions. And these are the questions that tend to be, I would say, probably the vague questions. So, you're the CEO of Spotify, what would you build? Right? Like that's it's like, oh wow, that's like blue sky questions. And so sometimes as you get further along in the industry, you might get more of these questions. So that's a lot of the similarities. I will say the differences is that you may get more different types of questions at Google. So they have like estimation questions, which I believe that Facebook still doesn't have. I'm not quite sure. Believe they still don't have those. And then they sometimes have a like go to market launching question, Google does, that Facebook doesn't necessarily have, or it's not like a strong focus. They may like ask you towards the end of the interview. And I think just recently they know Google no longer has a system design question, I heard, and that they've updated it. I'm not quite sure what they updated it to, but whatever they updated it to, that's also part of the Google interview process that's not necessarily part of Facebook.
Gotcha, gotcha. So definitely, if folks are interested in working at Google or Facebook, be ready to answer questions around metrics, execution, product sense, right? And overall, I think communication is like a general important trait of being a good product manager. Those are kind of probably at a high level the top 3 or 4 areas to focus on when preparing for interviews.
Yeah.
And Falana, you've actually written a really great LinkedIn article that we'll link down below in the video description around the 5 most common mistakes seen in PM interviews. Could you tell us a bit more about, from your experience interviewing candidates, what are the key things that make someone stand out in a product management interview? And what are things that you look out for when you're interviewing these candidates?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I'd probably say the hands down the most common mistake is that candidates will try to force fit a framework that they've created. And so a framework should guide the interview, but your product sense should be your drive. Do not let the framework drive your interview. And it's very obvious when I'm talking to a candidate and they're just like hyper focused on just like getting through their framework.
Mhm.
And when I ask questions or I ask them to dive in, or if I ask them to consider like a different perspective, it's very clear because that wasn't part of their framework. And so they
Right.
get like, oh, they start choking up. And so it's very obvious when they've practiced perfecting their framework and not just using the framework as as a guide to drive their product sense.
Right.
So I always tell people who are interviewing, like, have a framework. I like to say, ideally, the more skeletal your framework looks, probably the better. If you have a framework that's like, here are the users, and then I'm going to segment them in these 5 ways all the time, it'll be very clear because I like if a candidate is interviewing, they'll throw in segments that's not even relevant to the question. I'm like, hmm.
Right.
So the more skeletal your framework is, so if you're like, okay, users, just make sure I get through users,
Mhm.
and but making sure that I'm internalizing the question and really thinking about who are some of the users that might use this product, you're
Mhm.
probably on the right track. But the more descriptive and more convoluted and the more like rigid your framework is, the more you're probably setting yourself up for failure.
Gotcha, gotcha. So keep it broad, really understand the problem that you're getting asked about, and don't sound robotic. Don't try to just repeat or check the box on frameworks, right? Have a loose framework that you can leverage to have some sort of structure, right? At the end of the day, a framework is to have structure as you're thinking and
Yes,
communicating, but don't memorize it. Try and definitely, like you said, don't force fit the framework, right? And really, at the end of the day, what I share with some folks is interviews are a conversation with someone else, and it's a two-way street, right? You're there to also understand more about the company, types of people you'll be working with, right? As on the other side, the interviewer is there to understand more about you and how you think. So treat it as a conversation more than anything. And if you're force fitting a framework, that's not a conversation, right?
of
It's
course. Yep.
the interview will be able to tell that you're kind of just memorizing or reading off a framework.
Yes,
So
very easy to tell.
super, super helpful. Really good advice, Filana. We're very close to kind of wrapping up our conversation. I have two more questions for you, Filana. My next question is around how technical do product managers need to be, in your opinion?
Okay. Yeah, I will say, hands down, the more knowledge you have around the partners that you're working with, for me personally, I've realized it's the less meetings that you need to have.
Mhm.
So, for example, like if my designer is thinking of something that they want to create, like because I have the technical background, I can easily say, like, that's going to really affect how fast like the app is going, or that's going like having this particular feature is going to affect our latency. So let's revise it to see like another solution. And that just saved me a meeting. Same thing with, talking to engineers if they have an idea and they want design to look through it. Because I have a basic understanding of design, I can put in the feedback like, oh, the designer probably can't do that, or the designer, based on the framework that the designer uses, we won't be able to implement that. So let's work to see like what other alternatives there are. And so again, that saved me a meeting. So it's helpful to have a technical background. It's helpful to have an MBA. It's helpful to take courses in design, but it's not necessary. There's a lot of PMs that don't have a technical background, or they don't have a design background. And what I've simply noticed is that if you have the core skills to be a product manager, and some of them being, how to communicate, how to, and communicate means like disseminating information, writing, require or PRDs. If you have the ability to influence, if you have the ability to be empathetic, the other kind of bonuses you can honestly get by with just meeting with different teams, and more often than you would probably have to if you had that expertise. So it's not necessary. It does make my life a little easier. Again, like I probably have substantially less meetings than a PM who doesn't have that background, but they're still equally successful and they still can get the same amount of stuff done.
100%. Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, you want to be as efficient as possible with your time and the value that you're creating. So having expertise in design, in engineering, and technical problem solving can allow you to think a lot faster, make decisions faster, and be able to resolve problems or unblock folks a lot faster. So makes a lot of sense. And you have all of those, which is amazing, Fulana, and why you're such a great product manager. To wrap it up, Fulana, any final words of encouragement or advice for folks that are either aspiring to become product managers one day or that are currently product managers today?
Yeah, I think for me, it's like I always stress reading. Like, I think it's just so important to read. There's various product management books out there about how to think about the users, how to consider stakeholders. And as you go on this journey, reading can help you in so many ways. One, reading, especially like what's recently been out there, is helpful if you are interviewing because you have knowledge of emerging technologies. And so one cool thing about having this knowledge is when you're thinking of solutions in your interview, they tend to be more unique, which always brightens the interviewer's day if we hear of a unique or interesting or intriguing solution that's never been heard before. And then also, like, as someone who is a PM or starting out in PM or been in PM for years, it's always good to know about these emerging technologies. One, because it can spark some ideas for what your next iteration for your future product can be, but also just keep you on your toes on what's out there and how you can improve your skill set as a product manager.
Reading. There it is. There it is. Fulana, any books that you've been reading lately or any blogs, resources that you would like to share with our viewers today?
Honestly, I don't have anything specific. Generally, what I do is I honestly just go through various news channels, Facebook News, Google News, like anything
Mhm,
that has an aggregation of news. And
mhm.
because I generally look at product related stuff, they tend to just show up in the feed and I just
Gotcha.
click it and read it. Similarly with LinkedIn as well, I think LinkedIn kind of picked up on just like me browsing through like my feed and clicking on product related stuff. So as a result, it'll start showing up more product related posts.
Mm.
So I think ideally that's, or not ideally, I think honestly that's how I kind of catch up on just like quick reads on emerging technologies and new kind of frameworks that PMs can use. But in the past, I've read like the PM Bibles, like
Mhm.
Hooked and Design of Everyday Things,
Yep.
books like those. So I've read through those. So it's all about just like learning more of how do other PMs PM their life.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah, that's super helpful. Yeah, reading 100%. Like you said, folks, make sure on LinkedIn, on Facebook, any social media channels that you have, leverage those, right? Those essentially by the things that you like, they'll start curating your newsfeed and providing you with more resources related to what you are interested in. So makes lots of sense. Thank you so much, Filana, for joining us today. This was a really insightful session. I learned a lot, and I'm really sure all of the viewers today will learn a lot and take away from this conversation. How can folks connect with you, Filana?
Find me on LinkedIn, Falana Benton. Honestly, if you just type in Falana in Google, I think I'm the only Falana that works at Google into LinkedIn. And yes, add me and would love to, chat if you have any other questions. Sometimes I am slammed, and so I may not be able to do like full-blown calls, but I will always find a way to answer any questions or chat via LinkedIn to support anyone who, needs support.
Awesome. Love it, Filana. Thank you so much. We'll link your LinkedIn in the video description as well for folks to reach out.
Thank you.
And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Folks, thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you in the next video. Goodbye.